angled. It's way too big. It's way too big, but I love it. Okay. So hello. I have a couple of different things that I wanted to show you. I hope you are having a wonderful day. I am starting to grade your exams this afternoon, and I should have grades up by tonight. So I apologize for not actually having them in your hand to give you. Yeah, I'm being strangled. It's done. That was quick. I wanted to show you a couple of things before we actually continued our discussion of semantic memory and concepts. Oh, cool. I didn't talk to you about the video project, and technically you're supposed to come to me with your idea by Friday. But since I haven't really talked about it, I will extend it to probably next week so that you have a little more time to think about it. But I wanted to show this to you because I meant to show it to you and I put it up to show you on Friday, and then I completely forgot. All right. So here is our video project instructions and a rubric. So let me go ahead and pull that up. Okay, so basically what you are going to have to do for this project, you can work in groups of 3 or 4. You are allowed to work in a group of 2 or work alone. Just be aware that you have a little more work to do if you're working alone. But you're going to design, script, and film a TV commercial for a product, whatever product you want it to be. Please kind of keep it appropriate. We are going to be showing these to the class, so just keep the language and the content appropriate. I don't think I have to tell you. Yeah, it's definitely not October 13th. In fact, it's way past October 13th. So if you could let me know by November 5th, which is not this Friday, but next Friday, so that we can have an idea of what to do, because technically it's not due until December. But I want to talk to you and make sure you have the right idea for what you want to do. And I will show you some other video projects that people have done in the past. So that'll help too. So you're going to develop the idea from cognitive psychology. So you need to demonstrate 5 different concepts that you've learned in class or in your textbook and actually put those in the commercial. So for example, one of the things that, oh, I'm filming and I'm walking away. I forget that I'm filming. So for example, we talked about the total time hypothesis, that repetition boosts memory. So one of the things that you can do is repeat the name of your product over and over and over again. So that way people would remember the name of the product. So you need at least 5 of those different concepts. You're going to script and film your commercial. You can use camera phones, but there are camcorders and recorders from the library. Make sure that the file isn't too large. If it is, you can send me the link to your Google Drive where the video is located, or you can put it on YouTube on a private file so that we can look at that as well. This is due on December 6th. So the last week of classes, that Monday of the last week it's due. And then on Wednesday, the 8th, we are going to watch the videos. We're going to have a film festival. We're going to show all of the videos and we're going to have snacks. Of course, we're going to have snacks. It's not a food festival or a film festival. I called it a food festival. There's a Freudian slip for you. A film festival with snacks. There are no makeup presentations, so please make an effort to be here. If you know that you're not going to be here, be sure to talk to me. And then you can kind of see the scoring here. So it's kind of hard to see here, but this is for an A. So you need to demonstrate 5 oh, it's right here. I see. So here's A, B, C, D, and F. Generally, nobody's gotten worse than a high B on these, so I think you should be pretty good. This will give your grade a nice boost if it turns out that the exams really aren't working out so well for you. You are going to have to talk about your production on the 8th. So you need to make sure that you're familiar with the concepts, that you understand what they are, and you need to tell me how you demonstrated them in the video. You should also be able to answer any questions questions that I or your classmates might throw at you. I'm not going to be too tough. I'm not going to be like, it's time to give them hard balls. They'll be fine. They'll be pretty straightforward questions. So be prepared for those. So about 1/3 of the grade will come from the oral presentation. The remaining 2/3 will come from the content and creativity. Okay, so write this down. You need to have your idea to me and the makeup of your group by November 5th. Shoot me an email and let me know what you have an idea for. And if you have questions about anything or questions about how to put this together, make sure to make an effort to reach out to me. But ideally, this should be fun. Like, this should be fun for you. It should be fun to film. Oh, Selena, you changed your hair. I like it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bailey. November 5th, that's a Friday. So that's not this coming Friday, but it's next Friday. As you can see, we're way past October 13th. So I'll give you an extra couple of weeks because I was a couple of weeks behind and I'm sorry about that. I've kind of had a lot going on with meetings and stuff like that. Okay, anybody have any questions? Okay, so I want to go back really quick to our War of the Ghosts. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off of share really quick. I want to read through some of people's thoughts about War of the Ghosts. And I won't name names, but I will share stories. If you choose to identify yourself, I am going to ask you questions, but you don't have to identify yourself. But I want to see what people said. Because recall of that weird story can be a really funny thing. So I want to see. All right. Okay, we go to assignments. Right. Okay, homework 4, the War of the Ghosts. Got it. Okay. All right. Download. All right. Let me see. Downloads. Bang. Okay. Okay. Wait. Here we go. Open. Okay. I'm just going to pick one. Okay. 2 young men from a town in which I do not remember the name went down to the river to hunt seals. Once they arrived, it became foggy and still. They heard battle cries and thought they were near a war party. They returned to shore, hid behind a log, heard canoe paddles on the water. They saw the canoes and one began to approach them. The men in the boat asked the men to join them. One responded he had no arrows. The man replied that there were being arrows in the boat, and the young man on the shore said no to joining. His family didn't know where he was. He looked at the other young man and said he would join. The other man did, and the canoes went upriver to a town. The battle began between the townspeople and the people on the river. The original young man figured out that these people were ghosts. He was then hit with an arrow, but didn't feel sick or in pain. The ghosts on the river retreated, and the young man went home. He started telling his friends about what happened, and as soon as morning light struck, he had a black liquid emerge from his mouth and his face contorted. He was dead. That's actually pretty good with not a lot of distortions in the story. So bravo to whoever did that. I actually know who they were, but I'm not naming names. So bravo to the person who did that. I'm going to pick another one. 2 boys went down to the beach together to hunt seals. While they were hunting near the water, they heard what they believed to be a war cry a ways off. The boys hid behind a log on the beach, but the warriors spotted them anyway. The newcomers pulled their canoes up to the shore and approached the boys, asking if they would go to war. So I'm not going to go through all of this again. I think it's interesting that this person identified them as boys, because I think they were young men, but the story's pretty vague on that. So I think that's interesting. Let me see if I can find another one. Okay, let's see. Okay. The War of the Ghosts was about two young men going seal hunting and hear commotion as they were out in the water. They paddle their canoe to shore and hide the bushes. Then a group of men come to shore and tell them they are going to fight people down the way and ask if the young men will go with them. One of them said no because his family didn't know where he was and what he was doing. He then offered for the other young man to go. That's a really nice way of saying that he threw his friend under the bus, but yeah. The young man who couldn't go went home. The other man went and stayed to fight with the men. During the fight, the men said that the young man was wounded, but the young man didn't feel anything and realized they were fighting ghosts. He went home and told his family about it, and I think they were around a fire outside his house. The young man fell over and died, presumably from the wound he got from the ghost war. They don't actually mention anything about a wound, and this person doesn't. Okay, so remember that I mentioned that something black came out of the man's mouth in the original story? Did anybody imagine it as blood when they wrote it out? Did they think it was blood? A lot of people will do that. I've occasionally had people say that it was a creature. Ew. Ugh, gross. By the way, that myth that you swallow like 8 spiders a year in your sleep, it's a myth. You don't actually do that. And that makes me so happy. I don't want things crawling in me. But you'll kind of notice that the details that you remember, it's a weird kind of story. And yet, as a result, we're going to try to get it to twist our narrative of how stories go. Did anybody have a really funny one that they wanted to share? Most of you probably, I know a couple of years ago, somebody wrote it in such a vague way that it was really funny, but I have a feeling that most of you tried to stay serious and tried to stay on content given the nature of the topic. So I will take a look at these and see if I find anything else interesting, but it looks like from what people have been reporting and the ones that I looked at, that you have a pretty good memory for the story. It's just that some of the details might be changed. So this is going to come into play more when we talk about everyday memory, because sometimes we're going to try to twist strange narratives to fit our own ideas of how stories should go. And oftentimes, stories that are different to us, ones that we haven't grown up with, they have a very different narrative to us. All right. Time to talk some more about concepts. Thank you, everyone who drew dogs last week. So I want to go back to talking about dogs. Believe it or not, we are going to talk about prototypes and exemplars. And I'm going to have a sip of this Dr. Pepper cream soda. That's good stuff. Okay. So what is a prototype? And yes, I'm going to have really cute pictures of dogs today. So when we are talking about whether or not a dog is a typical dog or not, one of the ways that we can talk about this is in terms of a prototype. So a prototype is a central description or a conceptual core that includes the major features of a category. So right here, I'm pretty sure this is a very cute Boston Terrier puppy. But here's the thing, I'm showing you an example of a dog with this Boston Terrier puppy, but here's what's kind of critical about a prototype. A prototype does not actually exist. So it is a conceptual core. So it's the major features of a category. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the average of everything. We're going to take the average. So for example, you probably have seen some dogs with little ears. You've probably seen some dogs with some bigger ears, and you've seen dogs that have big, long, floppy ears. A prototype approach is basically going to take the average of all of those different ear lengths and give us an average length. So what a prototype ultimately looks like are a list of features or attributes. So the typical attributes of a dog will be that it has a nose, that it has ears, that it has 4 legs, that it has a tail, and that it has a certain body type. Now, what you're going to do when you are listing these features, you're going to take the average. So we're going to look at an average dog with an average head size, with an average snout length, with an average ear length, and an average tail length. So here's the thing. Most dogs are not completely average. So what this means is that a prototype is never going to look like any particular dog. However, some dogs are going to fit that prototype much more easily than others will. So for example, Labradors and Golden Retrievers seem to do a pretty good job of fitting the average. They're closer to that prototype than a dog like a Chihuahua. Like a Chihuahua is just tiny in all dimensions. It's probably not going to be very close to the average. Likewise, a Great Dane or a Great Pyrenees, which are big dogs, they're not really going to be toward the average either. But a Labrador, that's a pretty average dog. It's got an average ear length. It's an average snout length. Depending on the breed, it might be gigantic. I don't know how many of you were around for Dr. Voll's dog Fisher. That was a very big Labrador. But Labradors tend to be pretty average in all of their features. So even though a Labrador is not the prototype, because the prototype is theoretical, it's not real, it's not going to look like any particular dog you would ever encounter, it's going to be the closest thing to that. A dog like Smedley might actually be pretty close to it as well. The one thing that I think kind of separates Smedley is his fur is kind of on the shorter side, and he's got really long legs for a dog of his size. Like, he is a horse dog. So a prototype doesn't actually look like anything. It's an average of all of these different features or attributes. So when we're determining category membership, here we have a couple of different examples. Here we have some more cute dogs. Is a Chihuahua a dog? So what we're going to do is we're going to check the attributes of the concept Chihuahua, and we're going to look for the category prototypes. We're going to match a Chihuahua to the prototype and see what relates. How closely related are they? So in particular, what items that the Chihuahua has that are similar to the prototype are what are known as family resemblances. So we're going to try to make sure that we can obtain family resemblances to determine whether or not a Chihuahua is actually a dog. And a Chihuahua does have the features of a dog in a lot of ways. Now, relative to its size, it's actually got a pretty medium-sized ear length. Now, on a Chihuahua, everything is smaller, but we're talking about the fact that it's relative to its size here. So one thing we kind of see, this Chihuahua actually has pretty medium-sized ears relative to the rest of its size. It has a pretty long tail, average tail, relative to the rest of its size. So we're going to try to look at the attributes that our Chihuahua and our prototype dog have in common. Generally, what we're going to find is that the more family resemblances that there are, the closer that it represents the prototype. So typical members of a class generally have higher family resemblances. They have a greater number of family resemblances relative to atypical ones. And this can actually also explain the typicality effect. The more closely that a breed represents the prototype, the more typical it often is, and the more likely that we will judge it as typical. So this little lab, who is adorable, is going to be judged to be more of a typical dog. And we'll, going back to our sentence verification, if I ask you, is a Labrador a dog or is a Chihuahua a dog? Because the Labrador has more family resemblances and it looks more like the prototype than the Chihuahua, it's also going to be judged to be a more typical member of its class, and it's going to take you less time to verify that it's a dog compared to a Chihuahua. So again, family resemblances, we're basically looking at a match between the Chihuahua's features and the prototype's features. We're going to see how much of those different features between our concept and the prototype match up. Is everybody good here? Okay. So what are some of the problems with prototypes? So one of the big issues with prototypes is that researchers have actually found that family resemblances don't really work well when categories are based on goal directedness. So for example, a typical birthday present, woof. Like, what is a tip? Somebody tell me what a typical birthday, a prototypical birthday present is for you. Somebody tell me one. Like, what is a very common birthday gift for you? A shirt. A shirt. Do you think other people would like shirts? Are shirts typical gifts? Okay, I don't actually get a lot of shirts as gifts. Does anybody else not get shirts as gifts? Okay, Beth, what do you often get for birthday presents? Okay, so Harry Potter stuff? Okay, how many of you get Harry Potter stuff as a birthday present? I don't either. I get workout clothes and gift cards. And that's another thing. How many of you give gift cards as gifts? You give gift cards. Now, does that mean that you want gift cards? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But my whole point is that oftentimes, I mean, the idea is that birthday presents that are designed to make the person who's getting them happy, it's a lot harder for us to actually find a prototype. So this comes from work by Barcelo back in 1985. Generally, family resemblances don't really predict typicality for these goal-derived categories. So typically, typical members of categories for like birthday presents were those best satisfying the goal, so providing pleasure to somebody rather than sharing attributes to other category members. So here's the thing, a gift card has certain features on it that a shirt does not. But here's what both of those very different birthday presents do. Ideally, if they are selected well, they make another person happy. So there's more of a goal like the family resemblance is how well it meets the goal rather than what features it has. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Here's the other thing. Generally, experts do not use typicality to judge category membership. So this comes from work by Lynch and colleagues. They were basically asking people who were experts in trees and people who were not experts in trees. So if they're not an expert, they're going to be a novice. So they had people who were experts in trees and novices in trees. And they actually asked both the experts and the novices to provide typicality ratings. What they ended up finding is that experts don't use typicality and novices don't use typicality either. They use familiarity. Even if they're not typical members of a class, they are going to judge on the basis of familiarity. So in your textbook, they actually say that experts identified very tall, non-weed-like trees as the best examples of trees. So they were basically, ratings were basically determined whether or not a tree corresponded to an ideal tree, not a typical tree. So like an ideal tree might be like a redwood or a pine tree or even a palm tree. And I don't know about you, but palm trees are not very typical trees. You don't normally see palm trees everywhere. Novices typically use familiarity. So for novices, they actually pick maple and oak trees. Why did they pick those? Because maple trees and oak trees are everywhere. It's not because they're typical, it's because they are more familiar. And then additionally, ginkgo trees. Have y'all ever seen a ginkgo tree? They stink. And then catalpa trees, that novices actually rated them the worst, even though they're very much like prototypical trees, because most people don't see a lot of ginkgo trees or catalpa trees. They're rarer. So novices use the familiarity. Experts don't use typicality at all. So this doesn't really fit with the prototype theory. So one of the things that's kind of interesting, when I ask people to draw a typical dog, now, you all actually did a really good job. I think for a lot of you, the dogs that you drew actually probably did closely approximate a prototype. I saw medium length ears, medium-sized bodies, medium-sized tails. But a lot of times when people draw dogs, they draw dogs that they grew up with, dogs that they have experience with. And so if you've grown up your whole life with small dogs, seeing a big giant dog is like, wow, that ain't right. I grew up with Basset Hounds, which are not very smart. And I grew up with Boston Terriers because my Grammy had a bunch of them. So I was used to seeing little dogs. And then I go to graduate school and I live across the street from a Great Dane. And I go to Atlanta and my advisor has a Newfoundland dog, which is also huge and fluffy. And I'm like, those dogs ain't right. They're too big. So our experiences often will inform our understanding of what a category is. And it's part of the reason why, if you've been exposed to smaller dogs your whole life, your idea of what a typical dog is probably going to look a little bit different from somebody that grew up in a house full of Labradors. So we store large numbers of different examples that we've encountered. So the prototype approach basically says you take a list of attributes, but I don't think that that's how most people work. I don't judge whether or not something is a dog based on a list of attributes. I judge whether a dog is typical by comparing it to other examples of dogs that I have seen. Odds are pretty good. This is how you judge whether something is a dog as well. You look at other examples that you've experienced. And because of this, the exemplar approach is much less abstract and theoretical than the prototype's list of common attributes. This is easier. You can go back and look at all of the dogs that you've ever experienced and say, how closely related are these? So what's our evidence for this? So our evidence for this is actually from typicality effects. More typical members typically have more stored evidence. We judge something as being more typical because we encounter it more often. So we have more stored evidence of more typical members. And the frequency of how often we see something affects how we judge members of that category. So we're going to compare a new animal to other dogs that we are familiar with. And we're going to compare it to all of the other stored instances of dogs that we've seen throughout our lives. So I'm going to take this off really quick. So if you see a dog that looks like this, and I'm going to pull up a dog. We actually thought about getting this type of dog, but we ended up not doing it. We really wanted a Vizsla. So if you see a dog that hey, I quit it. I was typing. So if you see a dog that looks like this, you can actually go through and store in your mind all of the different instances. So yes, this is a Xolo, a Mexican hairless dog. We actually thought they were really cute. You may not necessarily agree, but we thought it was cute. It's like that dog in Coco. So if you see something like this, you're going to store it next to other instances of dogs, and you're going to judge whether or not it's a dog as a result. So one of the things that I actually kind of like about the exemplar approach is that instead of basically taking all of the dogs that you've ever experienced with the prototype approach and cutting it down to like an average that doesn't resemble any possible dog you'd ever encounter, the exemplar approach actually keeps all of your stored instances and preserves variability. So you're aware that there are dogs that are tiny. You are aware that there are dogs the size of horses. You are aware that there are dogs that are smart. You are aware that there are dogs that are not so smart. So this can explain a typicality effect about the same way that it explains a prototype effect. You have more so if I ask you, is a robin a bird versus is a penguin a bird? Robin is faster to verify because you've probably seen a lot more robins than you've seen penguins. The only time you see a penguin is when you go to the zoo, or if you go to Australia or New Zealand. Or Antarctica, but I don't think any of you have been to Antarctica. Okay, so what are some issues with the exemplar approach? Well, first of all, it doesn't actually work well with simple concepts. So it may not necessarily work. One of the things that we find is the exemplar for even numbers. That's a simple concept. All even numbers share a common feature. They can be divided by 2. But anything beyond that, you don't need to think of exemplars. So exemplars don't work for these kind of concepts like odd numbers versus even numbers, for example, because they all share a common defining criteria. So oftentimes with those simple concepts, we're going to look for commonalities similar to prototype theory. Generally, what we are going to find is that more complex concepts are going to require exemplars. Sorry, I got too excited. Everybody good? Okay. So now we're going to move on to talk about schemas and scripts. Thanks for sticking it out. We've only got like 15 minutes left, so thanks for sticking it out. I know it's gross and cold out there. I'm going to go grab my mittens. I'm always so cold. Okay, so a schema is an organized package of knowledge. Now, we kind of talked about this when I showed you the picture of the, when I talked about the story about washing clothes and how that's a big concept that is easier to organize when we actually have the title of the story. That kind of helps us out. But a schema is basically an organized packet of knowledge. So this might include things like going to a restaurant. So when we go to a restaurant, we expect that a restaurant will have certain things. At some point, you are probably going to have to pay for your food, right? Like, or somebody is paying for your food. But generally, a restaurant requires monetary exchange for food. You don't just go, give me this McDonald's burger and fries for free, please. It won't happen. So you're going to have to pay for your food. Now, here's what's important. Depending on the restaurant, sometimes you pay before, like at Panera and a lot of fast food places. For a lot of sit-down dine-in places, you're paying for your food after the fact. In some cases, you are grabbing your food right away and it only takes you 5 minutes to get. Other times for a fancy sit-down meal, it might be there you might be waiting for a while. They might serve bread and a salad beforehand. Sometimes there are places to sit. Sometimes you have to wait for a seat. Sometimes a waitress seats you. Sometimes you grab your own seat. So in general, that's restaurants. There are some basic ideas. There's food that you pay for and you can sit there and eat it. And that's basically it. But there are all of these other little aspects that can vary from place to place. But here's what's amazing. If I go to a brand new restaurant, so if I go to a restaurant that's out of a storage container, for example, because those are starting to become things, like the little storage container restaurants. I have a basic idea of what to expect, right? I'm not going to go there and be so confused that I don't know what I'm doing because I have this basic understanding of what happens at a restaurant that I can carry with me from situation to situation. So a schema helps organize that. You have a schema of what my office should look like. You have a schema of a professor's office, which is why sometimes people come in there and they go, you don't have a lot of books there. No, I don't. Most of my work is done through papers rather than books. So if you went in my file cabinets, well, let's just say there's a lot of stuff in there, but no, I don't actually have a lot of books. But the fact that you expect there to be books indicates that you have a schema of what a professor's office should look like and that there should be books there. Now, a script is a little bit different, but it's kind of the same sort of idea. A script is like a schema, except we're talking about a time-based sequence of events. So scripts store information about typical events. So let's talk about lunch in the dining hall. What is the very first thing that happens when you get to the dining hall? Temperature scan. Have to take your mask off to do it. Then what do you do? Okay, and then what do you do after that? You do actually have to scan your card before you get in line. You got to pay for your food. Get in line, and then what do you do? Grab a tray. Grab silverware, and then tell them to fill up the whole plate full of fries. Oh wait, that's just some of you. No, I love it. Occasionally I'll be behind somebody who's like, I just want fries. I wish I could just have fries. And then maybe you get dessert, maybe you go to the salad bar, maybe you get something to drink, and then you go and talk with your friends. And then what do you do when you're done? You bust your tray. Now, if somebody went to grab a tray and they bust it before they put any food on it, wouldn't that look a little weird? Probably. That's because we have a time-based sequence that we expect to happen. Now, what's actually kind of cool about scripts, though, is that they can be flexible. So maybe you don't get in line. Like there are some times when I go to the lunch line and it's so long, I'm like, nuts to this. I'm just going to go get the salad bar and then wait for the line to cut down. So it's not changing the overall sequence of the dining hall. You know, at some point, if I want hot food, I'm going to have to get in that line, but I'm modifying the sequence to allow for more flexibility. So scripts basically consist of what is called a frame and also what are known as slots. So frames provide an overarching, unchanging structure. You're probably going to have to scan your card for food, and that has to happen at the very beginning. You're going to get a tray. You're going to put some kind of food on it. You're going to eat it, and then you're going to bust your tray. Now, the order of what, so that's what the frame is. You pay for your food, you wait for your food, you bust your tray. but there's some flexibility. You could go to the soup and salad bar first. You could get dessert first, especially if there are stuffed truffle cookies. You could go to the salad bar and then go to the hot bar. You could go to the hot bar twice. But the slots allow us to be flexible and allow us to potentially adapt. So it's not like, I can't stand in the hotline right away. That means my lunch is invalid. No, you're still following the script. It's just that scripts are a bit more flexible than a schema will be. Does this kind of make sense? Okay, so why are these so helpful? Because we can form expectations. It's like, I have a pretty good idea of what stores are going to be in a mall. So when I go to a new mall, I've got a pretty good idea of what's going to be there. There's probably going to be food. There will probably be a bookstore. And if there is not a bookstore in the mall, there will be a bookstore near the mall. Likewise, there's probably going to be a Target nearby. And I know that there are places that I can get clothes and shoes and makeup. Like that never changes. So you can actually form expectations to help you adapt. And this is helpful for us because imagine the brain space that would be required if we had to treat everything like we were experiencing it the first time with no expectations. Now, I think it's important as much as possible to treat people like individuals and learn about them, but I also acknowledge that that takes a lot of bandwidth. But when you're going to a restaurant, when you're going to the mall, when you're going to school, you already have expectations to help prevent overloading what precious little resources you already have. Remember, your attention is limited. This helps cut down on clutter. And it helps us fill in gaps in our knowledge. Like, I'm the first in my family to go to college. I did not actually have an idea of what I could expect. So when I went to college, I had a lot of gaps. What helped was that thanks to other people around me and thanks to media, which is not always an accurate representation of college, professors' offices in TV shows and movies look much, much nicer than mine and are larger than mine. I wish I had like a wooden panel, then like a nicer desk and stuff like that. That'd be nice. But it helps fill in those gaps. And this can actually help us with things like visual search. So when we are expecting objects in a kitchen, we know which ones we're going to find. We're going to have things like utensils. We're going to find things like a kitchen faucet. And it turns out when we're looking for objects when we're doing a visual search for objects in a kitchen, we actually have an easier time finding expected objects because we know where they tend to be found. If I'm looking for a bowl, it's probably going to be on a horizontal surface in a kitchen, and it's probably not going to be on the floor. So we can actually use our schemas to help us with visual search for expected objects versus unexpected objects. I'm probably not going to think about where a stapler might be if it were in a kitchen, because I don't typically find staplers in the kitchen. We're almost done. Thanks for sticking it out. Okay, so schemas can absolutely bias and distort our memory. So I mentioned people falsely recalling books being in a professor's office when books were not actually present. But schemas can create biases in another way through the use of stereotypes. Stereotypes are oversimplified generalizations about certain groups. And oftentimes these stereotypes, while not always negative, there are some positive stereotypes around. So for example, a positive stereotype of women, for example, is that women tend to be nicer and more nurturing. And while that sounds really nice on the face of it, those kind of stereotypes prevent women from being seen as individuals. And let me make it clear, not everybody who is a woman or identifies as a woman is always nice. Some people who identify as women do not feel very nurturing, and they should be allowed to feel however they want to feel without that stereotype. So stereotypes can be positive, but they are often used in service of negative actions. And oftentimes these stereotypes provide us with a filter with which we view ambiguous behavior. So if there's behavior that we don't understand and that person comes from a marginalized group, we're probably going to default to a stereotype that we already have to justify treating them a certain way or trying to understand why they did a certain thing without really taking the time to see what was truly motivating them. So here's what we know about stereotyping. Now, one thing I will mention, cognitively speaking, your mind wants to simplify the world around it. So I am not saying that stereotypes are good. I am not saying that stereotyping people is good. I am saying that your mind wants to do it though. Your mind is going to try to create simplification where it can. And I would say some of that you are not going to be able to help, but awareness is what is key. If you are aware that your mind is trying to simplify the world and flatten your understanding of a group of people or a person, then you need to try to override that and process this a bit more consciously. Now, overt explicit stereotypes are decreasing. I actually found this in a previous cognition textbook, and basically, you have percentage of white participants selecting a trait to describe Black Americans. And overall, what's kind of critical here is that those stereotypes are absolutely decreasing. People say, no, I don't think the average Black person is superstitious in 1993 compared to 60 years before in 1933. So those overt explicit stereotypes are decreasing. The problem is, why is this happening? Now, do I think that we are becoming more tolerant? Yeah, I think that's some of it. I don't think that's all of it, but I do think when you are exposed to people that are not like you or ideas that are different from yours, that has the ability to broaden your world and give you a new perspective. So exposure to people who are not like us can make us more tolerant. However, you know it's bad to be a racist. You know it's bad to be a homophobe. You know it's bad to be sexist. You know it's bad to be ableist. So if I straight up ask you, are you racist? You're going to tell me no, because you know that a racist is a bad thing to be. In fact, what we often tend to find is that people get more upset about being called a racist or that their actions were racist than that they might have actually caused harm to another person. You know, and I think that's worth mentioning. So some of this is social desirability. And really, the real issue is that a lot of our behaviors and a lot of the ways that we see the world are due to implicit biases that we are not always aware of. Now, I am going to mention one of the things that you can look at to learn more about your implicit biases are through Project Implicit at Harvard. So it's Project Implicit. Now, I think it's really important to know that the replication of the implicit association test is a little iffy. There are reports that it can be consciously controlled, but it's an interesting way to learn about what potential biases you have without social desirability getting in the way. So I would encourage you, if you'd like to try it, to go check out Project Implicit at Harvard. You can go ahead and Google it. I will say that awareness of implicit biases is a good first step. But really what's going to help you override those biases are getting to know people that are different than you, reading works from people who are different from you, putting people on your Instagram who are different from you and have different perspectives. The more you get exposed to people who are not like you, the more that you can start to see people of other groups as individuals and start to counteract those implicit biases. It's awareness is the first step though. So that is pretty much all I had today. I will see you next time and have a wonderful day. Bye.